business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. We're going to spend some time in the first hour just breaking away from the news cycle. We'll get back to it in the second hour. I know many of you probably are a little bit weary of hearing all the questions about whether it is Antifa or whether it is the alt-right or whether it's the issue of discrimination or Confederate monuments and all the rest. We'll probably get back to that in the second hour, but I thought this first hour would be a kind of a nice break to really focus on what we call apologetics. We talk about so often how we want you to be able to articulate a biblical worldview and know how to defend a biblical worldview. So first half of this hour, we're going to look at a book on God and the problem of evil. This is one of those perennial questions that we certainly need to have answers for. In the second hour, I want to get to the issue of the eclipse. Matter of fact, those of you watching online can see I have some of our solar sunglasses getting ready for the eclipse that will be taking place on Monday. But I do believe that that is also a very powerful argument for the existence of God. We have posted an article here, Solar Eclipses, Design or Coincidence. We're having some scientists say, well, this is just a remarkable coincidence that we have a perfect solar eclipse. And yet, as we'll talk about in the second part of this hour, in his book, The Privileged Planet, astronomer Guillermo Gonzalez talks about when he was watching his first total eclipse many years ago, began to really question whether or not this was just a coincidence, began to do some estimates and say, is there anywhere else, even in our solar system, where this takes place? The best example you can have is that particular moon called Prometheus that orbits Jupiter, but even there, I guess it's Saturn, but even there, it really isn't a total solar eclipse. So it's really honest to say that the only place in the solar system, in our own solar system, where you have a perfect total solar eclipse is right here on Earth. Is that just coincidence, or is that something that maybe shows the fingerprints of God? So we're going to get into that in the second hour. I think that will be a fascinating conversation, and if you want to ask questions, we certainly would welcome your phone calls. And I might mention that many of you in the listening audience from Oregon all the way to South Carolina are in the path of the totality. That is, you will see a total solar eclipse. But even if you're further away, even our listeners in Maine or as far away as El Paso, probably some of the farthest from the thing, you'll still see about 50 or 60% of an eclipse. So everyone in America, at least on continental part of America, will see this. I apologize for those of you up in Alaska that may not, but everybody else is going to have that opportunity. And so that is something else we'll talk about, and maybe how to watch it, how to make sure that you're safe, you don't hurt your eyes. We'll get into all of that in just the second part of this hour. But I wanted to bring to the microphone one of the editors of this new book, God and the Problem of Evil. It is edited by Chad Meister, who's been on the program with us before, as well as Dr. James Dew. And Dr. Drew is, again, a graduate of Southeastern Baptist Seminary, has his Ph.D. there. He's also an associate professor of the history of ideas and philosophy, and also the dean of the college at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary, author of a number of other books that we can talk about in just a minute. And James, always great to have you on the program with us.
Hey, good to talk to you again. I think it's been maybe a year or two, but I hope you're doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I used to see you all the time at the International Society of Christian Apologetics, and you are busy with family and everything else, so I haven't had a chance to see you, but we get to meet once again by phone. And one of the things I love about you, I guess I should call you Dr. Dew for just a few minutes here, is that you're not only a philosophy professor, but you're also a pastor. And when we talk about this problem of evil, we recognize there's two answers. One is the philosophical question, which we're going to focus most of our time and attention on. But the other is the emotional, spiritual issue. And as a pastor, you recognize that when you're dealing with somebody who just lost a loved one or want to know why they have cancer, they maybe aren't as interested in reading your book. They really just need some biblical counsel, don't they?
That's right. I tell my students all the time that, frankly, there really are these two problems of evil. There's the intellectual academic side, which has a variety of different expressions and a variety of different answers. And I think that as apologists, we've done a fairly good job of responding to those types of problems and equipping people to answer hard questions about them. But I think that the real problem of evil is this emotional problem that you pointed to. And I say to students all the time that the reason evil's a problem is because it sort of jumps up off of the street and it punches you in the gut and it brings you to your knees. And it has the effect of sort of disheveling your beliefs and your confidence. It shakes us. And for believers, and I think non-believers too, it makes belief in God somewhat difficult.
Well, and again, one of the things I think is so telling is to look at C.S. Lewis, who in the 20th century wrote one of the definitive pieces on the issue of evil, the problem of pain. But then later when he writes about his own emotional experience of losing his wife, A Grief Observed, you can see he's got those same questions as well. So that means that Dr. Dew, if nothing else, we have an opportunity to recognize that we can answer some of the questions intellectually, but that doesn't mediate the hurt and the pain that sometimes we feel because of evil in the world.
That's right. That's right. It really does. A lot of times when we're talking with people and we try to give them just purely academic or intellectual answers to their questions, it ends up being counterproductive. And so I encourage my students that, when you walk into a room and someone's grieving or mourning or suffering like that, you want to be really, really slow with the quote unquote answers.
That's right.
And you just want to bear that burden with them, and you want to weep with them, and you want to experience that with them more than anything, as opposed to trying to be philosophical or anything like that.
Again, you can look at some of the syllogisms. If God exists, then evil should not exist. Evil does exist, therefore God does not exist. That's the answer from the atheist. But for believers, they still struggle with this because they say, okay, we recognize that an all-powerful God would be able to destroy evil, an all-loving God would be wanting to destroy evil, and the fact that evil remains would sometimes lead people to believe that God is either not all-loving or not all-powerful. So again, this is a problem for the Christian, but it's also a problem for the non-Christian if you think about it, because if evil's in the world and you just believe we're a result of evolution, then there's no good or bad, there's no right or wrong, there's no evil, it just is, right?
That's right. And I think, much has been made about the incoherence of the Christian set of ideas, and that's not to dismiss it and say that it's not real or something that we should pay attention to. I think that's precisely where we've done the good work that I was talking about earlier. But the flip side of this argument is also true, and this doesn't often get a lot of attention. And that is that if there is no God, then we now have a whole new set of problems. And so I can remember John Lennox saying one time, as he responded to an atheist along these lines, he said, "Sure, you can get rid of God, and now you've solved your so-called problem of evil." He said, "But now you got a different problem, and that is you have no hope, and you can't explain anything else now." And I think that that's exactly right. In addition to that, I also think that you really haven't solved the problem of evil at all, because the whole move that the atheist would make there would be one of protest and anger, and yet if atheism is true, then there is nothing to be angry about. There's just reality, and that's it. So I don't think that it really resolves the problems.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to go through briefly, and this is, again, briefly to let you know the book is something that I would want you to read through, but the different views, the classical view, the Molinist view, which is probably new to some of you, the open theistic view, the essential kenosis view, as well as the skeptical theist view. We certainly commend the book to you. It is published by InterVarsity Press, and if you're really kind of struggling through this issue of God and evil, it is a resource that I wanted you to know about. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Dinesh D'Souza is ready to debunk what he calls the big lie in his book by the same title. The left has been saying that the president is a fascist and the Republican Party is akin to the Nazi Party. Street thugs and pundits throw around the Nazi card and fascism card with abandon. He believes it is time to turn the tables and explain who the real fascists are. If you want to see a true fascist, you need to look at Benito Mussolini. His favorite phrase was, everything in the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state. He was a statist who wanted every aspect of society under the control of the government. He even considered the word totalitarian a positive term. Adolf Hitler also believed in state control, but in a different way. When he assumed leadership of the German Workers' Party, he changed the name to the National Socialist German Workers' Party. He explained, we are socialist. We are the enemies of today's capitalist system of exploitation, and we are determined to destroy this system under all conditions. None of this sounds like the Republican Party. It has usually been the party of small government, political liberty, and economic freedom. If anything, fascism and socialism are more accurate descriptions of the American left. When he was on my radio program, Dinesh D'Souza also talked about the interesting parallels he saw between Nazi Germany and 20th century America. Until he did his research, he thought these correlations were interesting but not connected. It turns out that the motivations behind Hitler's brown shirts and the Ku Klux Klan are more interconnected than he expected. The modern eugenics movement in America, espoused by people like Margaret Sanger, also found a place in the policies in Nazi Germany. The Big Lie may be his most controversial book because he makes connections like this that few others have ever seen. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Sony Pictures, All Saints, the inspiring story of Pastor Michael Spurlock with John Corbett. In theaters August 25th, rated PG, allsaintsmovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Pleased to have with us just a bit longer Dr. James Dew. He is the editor of this new book, God and the Problem of Evil. He and Chad Meister have put this together. The classical view represented by Philip Carey, the Molinist view by William Lane Craig. I wanted to focus at least on those two because most people consider those very orthodox. And on the classical view, probably the quick answer to the question of evil is that evil is an absence. It's a corruption. What Philip Carey talks about here is that a rotten apple, a ruined house, a wicked soul, a divided community are all good things that have been corrupted. And that maybe gets away from saying, well, where did evil come from? Did God create evil? No, evil is the absence of God. Does that at least begin to help us answer this question of evil?
I think it speaks to an important piece of the discussion, and that is that question of exactly what is evil. And Augustine's answer that Carey unpacks for us really has been the standard understanding of what evil is for a very long time. But, of course, Augustine went on to say more, and he was trying to get at this thing about whether or not God created it, because if he created it and it is a thing, then that really does seem to be a pretty nasty idea and has pretty radical and disruptive implications for our doctrine of God. So Augustine says, well, it's not actually a thing as we think of thingness. It is the absence or the privation of that. The question still remains as to, well, why is it that it's here, or that why did God let this privation happen? And Augustine goes farther by saying, well, God let it happen because he has some good that he has in mind that will be achieved through and by the evil occurrences of our moral choices and things like that. And so Augustine kind of unpacks not just this classical understanding of what evil is, but he also goes the step of unpacking what's really been the classical view of why God allows evil, to bring about greater goods or prevent worse evils and things like that.
It's also helpful to make a distinction between moral evil and physical evil. The reason we have physical evil, tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes. It's because we live in a fallen world. It says in Romans that the creation groans in travail. The reason we have moral evil, I think everybody understands that, because of human sin nature. And making those distinctions, I think, are helpful as well, because when there's an earthquake, people say, well, why did God do that? Well, it's because we are still on a fallen world, but we look to a time in which there'll be a new heaven and a new earth, and where sin, death, decay no longer exist. And that's the great hope that Christians have.
That's right. And that's, Augustine talked about those things, and that's kind of a common feature for most theodicies today that we have. Theodicies, of course, being explanations of why God allows this and what God is up to in that. And almost all versions of any Christian theodicy will have what you just described in them as their end, sort of the culmination of everything.
Let's see if we can take some phone calls along the way, and we'll certainly be taking a lot of phone calls in the last half hour here when we get into the eclipse. But Teddy in Georgia, I think you have a good question that relates to this issue of God and evil. Go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to say that, Satan rebelled and God cast him on the earth. Then later he built us weak humans to be here, and he knew Satan was going to mess with us. That's question number one, or statement number one. Number two is, why don't God just destroy Satan now? Just get it over with.
Okay, good question. It also relates to what we'll get to in just a minute.
Yeah, great question. So we're not told. We do know that when Genesis 3 starts, and this is where Adam and Eve are going to be tempted and they're going to fall into sin. When this starts, the whole chapter begins with the serpent slithering into the garden. So here's what we do know. We do know that Satan fell prior to Adam and Eve. What we don't know is, well, when? How long before? It could have been 2 seconds before. It could have been 42 billion years. I don't know, and I don't think any of us could ever know. What we do know is that he fell prior to that. I think your second question is the really intriguing question, and to be honest and fair, we don't know exactly why it is that God doesn't just go ahead and eradicate it. It seems like a rational thing for us to assume he would do, but this is where Christian theodicy comes in, our attempts to explain this, and there's a variety of them. Some people say, well, maybe God allows it here so that you and I can experience hardships and thereby have the opportunity to grow in virtue and wisdom and compassion. And those are good things that we couldn't have without it. Or maybe there's events, other good things, other good states of affairs that could only ultimately be present with us through this type of history. These are the kinds of responses that have been given throughout history to the question that you just asked.
That is kind of a setup to the second of the 5 different views, and I'll only focus on the 2, but this is called Molinism, and this may be new to a lot of our listeners. I actually have colleagues that I work with that have really been following what William Lane Craig has been writing about. It goes all the way back to an individual by the name of Louis Molina, but this is the idea of providence. I love the fact that he starts out with Frank Capra's movie, It's a Wonderful Life, because in some respects it kind of relates a little bit back even to the question that Teddy was just asking.
That's right. And so think of Molinism saying this, basically. We tend to say that God is all-knowing, right, omniscient. And by that we mean that God knows everything there is to know about the past, everything there is to know about the present, and everything that he knows there is to know about the future. What the Molinist says is, yes, that is true, but that is too small of an understanding of God's knowledge. God not only knows all those true facts about the past, present, and future, but God also knows every other possibility that could have been and would have been given human freedoms and the choices we make. So if I'd have made a choice differently than I made today, I chose to wear a blue shirt, but if I'd have chosen to wear a white shirt, God knows what the world would have been like under those circumstances. And now when you think of that, you quickly realize, wow, God knows a lot of stuff. And so the Molinist theodicy is basically saying something very similar to the Augustinian theodicy, but the Molinist is saying, hey, with Molinism, with God having this kind of knowledge, God is thereby better equipped with wisdom and foresight and insights to see the circumstances that will unfold and therefore govern providence more efficiently, and therefore we can have more confidence that the evil stuff that's happening right now is actually woven in for some greater purpose.
What's so interesting is he even has a section in there about the ratio of non-Christians to Christians, and that will be kind of encouraging for people to read. But again, if you think about the movie, I think most people know It's a Wonderful Life, there's a sense in which God shows George Bailey what it would be like if he was never born, and that is sort of like the Molinist view. God would know that even though, from our perspective, this is a terrible world, full of pain and death and suffering and all the rest, it is a world that would be very different if we were to change some of the things that we think should have been changed in the world, because we're not omniscient and not all-knowing.
That's right. And so that's a good movie example of it. You also remember the Back to the Future movies from the 80s.
Yes.
In the early 2000s, there was a movie called The Family Man by Nicolas Cage, same type of movie where he ended up becoming a stockbroker, but he could have married his college sweetheart, and he has this flashback to see what that would have been like. And so this idea that there are other possibilities that could have been is a widely circulated idea in pop culture. Molinists are saying, hey, what if we employed that idea in our theology and wove that into our answers on the problem of evil as well?
Well, again, the book I wanted you to know about, and it's one that I would encourage you to read. We could get more into the deep weeds, but I really wanted, for those of you that have an interest in this or certainly are wanting to maybe resolve this tension in your life, to recognize that this new book out, about 200 pages, which looks at the 5 different views, and then these are presented by people like Philip Carey and William Lane Craig, who's been on the program with us, and others, and then they respond to the other individuals, and it is published by InterVarsity Press, just an outstanding resource. And just before we go, James, let's, if we can, talk about Southeastern Baptist Seminary. If people would want to know more about the seminary, maybe have classes with you or take online courses, what's available there at Southeastern?
Absolutely. If you go to sebts.edu, you can find out all about that. But we welcome students of all backgrounds and all callings to come to us, either our college or for our seminary, and take either online or residential courses. Everything we do at Southeastern comes back to the Great Commission, including my philosophy class. And we are about God's purposes, and we're not doing academics for the sake of academics. We're doing it because we feel like this will give us leverage in our culture to be ambassadors for Christ. And so that's who we are, and we'd love for folks to come check us out and come study with us.
Again, the book is entitled God and the Problem of Evil. We have a link so you can get it in paperback or Kindle. I think you'll really benefit from this. And for those of you that have been really struggling with this question, very well done. And again, Chad Meister, who's been on the program with us, and James Dew is with us right now, are the 2 editors. It's published by InterVarsity Press. You might be able to find it in your local bookstore, but we've made it very easy for you to order it there. James, thank you so very much. I hope you're doing well and look forward to the next opportunity.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Let's take a break. When we come back, a solar eclipse. All of us, at least in the continental United States, will have a chance to see it. Some of you will have a total solar eclipse that will pass right over your head. So we're going to talk about that, what that means, and is that coincidence, or maybe is that evidence of design? So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll talk about the solar eclipse happening next Monday. All that coming up right after this.
Would you like to be above average or exceptional? I'll explain how you can be in a moment. What do you think about change? Some people love it, others, not so much. I'm guessing you agree our culture needs change. But how will that happen? Change happens with you and your influence. If each of us does our part, God can change the culture through us. That's a goal at Point of View, to help you change things around you. We never charge for the information we deliver each day, but that information is not free. There is a significant cost in getting it to you. You know who helps us do that? About 1 out of every 800 listeners to Point of View. So you can be above average. You can be exceptional by visiting pointofview.net and clicking the banner Change Happens with You, or by calling 1-800-347-5151. Thank you for being exceptional by supporting Point of View. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
We're going to have a solar eclipse next Monday. I think many of you are prepared for it. As a matter of fact, I'd love to hear from some of you that maybe are going to travel to a location where you can see it. I mean, everyone from Salem, Oregon, to Carbondale, Illinois, to St. Joseph, Missouri, Nashville, Tennessee, all the way to South Carolina. I mean, you've got all sorts of places where there will be a total solar eclipse. First time that has spanned the entire country in 99 years. So we're going to talk about that. By the way, we have another total solar eclipse coming a couple of years from now. We'll get into that in just a minute. Let me take one phone call left over from the last hour. Here's Cindy, KBGS. Thank you, Cindy, for calling. What would you like to add to our conversation?
I would just like to add that I was thinking that the reason God doesn't just annihilate Satan at this time is we're still in a church age where people are choosing to be saved, and that if he went ahead and done that, then ones who may be saved would not be saved, and it wouldn't be their free will. They would lose the opportunity, and that we're just having to finish out until the rapture takes place.
I think that's a pretty good argument, and we might get back into that in the future when we talk about some of that, because what will the millennial kingdom be like? What will the new age world, the new heavens, new earth, and those kinds of things? That is another possible answer to Teddy's question. So, Cindy, I appreciate that. I'm going to move on, though, real quickly to get into this issue of a solar eclipse. And the first thing is, what is a solar eclipse? I think everybody has a pretty good idea. The way you get an eclipse is you have a light-bearing body, that's the sun. You have a platform, that's the earth. And you have something that comes between those, and that is the moon. Now, the moon has an orbit that is elliptical, so that's why we don't have continuous solar eclipses. And even when we do, and there are quite a number, and I maybe when I speak on this Monday, might even show online the map of the solar eclipses over the last year. The problem with that is that 3/4 of the Earth's surface is water. So unless you're on a ship, you're going to miss a lot of the solar eclipses. And then the others that come, they don't come in population areas. They come over Arctic areas, Antarctic areas, relatively desolate places in Africa or Asia, wherever it might be. But this one is a phenomenon. And because of this, you have two situations. You have when it's directly in front of the sun, you have what is known as an umbra. That will be a full shadow. And this will span from Oregon all the way through the middle of the United States to South Carolina. Then the rest of us, if we're not in that path, will have the penumbra. That's the partial shadow. Always hated the word penumbra because it was used to justify abortion, but it is to have a too technical idea. But nevertheless, it's kind of intriguing that we have a solar eclipse. And as I mentioned in the first part of this hour, Guillermo Gonzalez, co-author of the book The Privileged Planet, when a number of years ago he was watching a solar eclipse on another continent, all of a sudden it kind of hit him. Why do we have a total solar eclipse? There's no reason we should. And the reason we have it is kind of an interesting ratio. That is, the distance from the Earth to the moon compared to the Earth to the sun is different. The difference from the sun to the Earth is 400 times more than the distance from the Earth to the moon. But it turns out that the sun is 400 times larger than the moon, or you can look at it the other way, the moon is 1/400th the size. So as a result, you have a perfect solar eclipse. Now, as I pointed out, that caused Guillermo Gonzalez to say, well, is this any place else in the solar system where this takes place? And really all we've been able to do is find one possibility. But the Cassini spacecraft, when it actually got close to the platform of Prometheus, which is the moon of Saturn, recognized that it's not even circular, it's more potato-shaped. So even there, the closest example we have of a total solar eclipse does not exist. So it's fair to say, and I think it is accurate to say, that the only place in this solar system that you have a total solar eclipse is right here on Earth. Now, the question that some people always like to ask is that just accident? You know, one of the articles I've posted here came from an individual that wanted to make the case that this was just coincidence. But that caused Guillermo Gonzalez to begin to think, you know, maybe it's not a coincidence, because after all, we could have seen this as maybe something that was intended by God, and it really challenges what is known as the Copernican principle. Now, Copernicus, not so much, but his followers began to apply what they learned, because Copernicus was the first one to tell us that the earth was not the center of the universe. And so his followers began to say, you know, there's nothing really unique about planet Earth. There's nothing unique about us. And, of course, later you had people like Carl Sagan even writing a book called The Pale Blue Dot, and talking about the pale blue dot because when the Voyager satellite was leaving our solar system, they turned the cameras around to look back towards Earth, and you could just see this pale blue dot, and that was Earth. And the implication is there's nothing very significant about the world that we're in. But as astronomers, they well are aware of the fact that we have all sorts of physical parameters that actually can, in many cases, argue for the existence of God, or at least for the existence of some kind of design or designer. As a matter of fact, scientists have often referred to the universe as a just right universe. Matter of fact, some have called it the Goldilocks universe. Remember Goldilocks and the Three Bears? I mean, you had one bowl of porridge was too hot, one was too cold, and one was just right. One bed was too hard, one bed was too soft, and one was just right. And when you begin to look at, for example, just the parameters related to the existence of a universe, you recognize that they are all just right. One scientist put it this way: it's like we have this wall of various dials, and each one of those dials is perfectly adjusted so everything is just right. Move the dial a little bit to the left, move the dial a little bit to the right, you don't even have a universe. So you look at things like the constant in equation for gravity, or the constants in electromagnetism, or the relationship between the strong and weak nuclear forces, or the ratio of the proton to the electron, and you have all sorts of things that are just right for us to even have a universe. Then let's come back to planet Earth for just a minute, because scientists have found a couple of other things. It turns out that the size of the Earth, the distance of the Earth from the sun, and its axial tilt are, again, what? Just right. The size is important, because if we had a much smaller planet than we have right now that we exist on, there would not be enough gravity to keep our atmosphere so that we could breathe. But if it was much larger, it would make it very difficult for complex life to exist. If you look at the distance of our Earth from the sun, that is, again, very significant. And one of the things that Guillermo Gonzalez in his previous scientific books talked about, and he also mentions again in his book, The Privileged Planet, was that we, again, find ourselves in this kind of Earth habitable zone. This solar habitable zone is fairly narrow. For example, if the Earth was just about 5% closer to the sun, two things would happen. First of all, it would get too hot, and it would turn into kind of a runaway greenhouse effect. But second of all, the gravity at that point from the sun would keep it from rotating, so you'd have one side that was hot, one that was cold. It would no longer be able to rotate. If indeed the Earth was about 20% further away, then all sorts of things would freeze up. We would have the same kind of problem that you would have of trying to have life on the planet Mars. And so we're in this sort of, if you will, solar habitable zone. But then Guillermo Gonzalez went one step further and said, if you also look at our solar system, we have a couple of other things that seem to show design. These large planets, I mentioned Saturn, let's mention Jupiter. These two, first of all, keep our own Earth in a perfect circular, or relatively perfect circular orbit. But otherwise, if they weren't there because of their gravitational pull, eventually we would have an elliptical orbit. We'd be too close to the sun twice a year, too far away from the sun twice a year. And so we would certainly suffer in that regard. Of course, also, these huge planets, they're sort of like vacuum cleaners because they have such immense gravity. They actually collect up all sorts of meteorites and asteroids and keep us from really being attacked and hit by those, which of course would be devastating. And then when he even said you look at the galaxy itself, because we're in the Milky Way galaxy, he said not only are we in a solar habitable zone, but we're also in a galactic habitable zone. When we come back, I want to give you just a little bit of an estimate on what some people have tried to do to even estimate what the probability of all that would happen by chance or coincidence. But if nothing else, this solar eclipse is just one more example of scientists beginning to look for some of these designs, and they've concluded that we live in a just right universe. If you'd like to join us, we'd love to hear from you. When we come back, let's take some phone calls. I know some of you are going to watch the solar eclipse. I'm going to give you some ideas about what to do and not to do. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The topic of immunizations can be controversial to many. Some even have a religious objection to having their children immunized as a requirement to attend public schools. Those objections often fall on deaf ears, but some states have provided for a religious exemption for parents who, for religious reasons, object to their children receiving the needle. Florida falls into that category. So naturally, when Patrick Flynn informed his Florida school that he was invoking that exemption, he was surprised to hear the school refused to follow the law. So he filed a lawsuit. Now, there's an important fact that I haven't told you yet. The school is a private Catholic school. It's not a public school. As such, it is itself protected by the First Amendment to make its own policies in keeping with their faith. A unanimous state appellate court sided with the Catholic diocese, citing the doctrine of church autonomy. Siding with Flynn would, quote, further his own religious views at the expense of the diocese on the topic of immunizations, wrote the court. Quote, we are convinced that a secular court should not be making the judgment as to which side's religious view of immunization is to be respected, unquote. In other words, while Flynn has a right to the protection of his religious beliefs, he may not use the state's judicial arm to compel a private religious institution to depart from its religious beliefs. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Guide at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Are you going to be watching the solar eclipse on Monday? Love to get your comments. Let me just mention again that you're going to need one of these solar glasses. I've got some of these right here. Matter of fact, I'm thinking, Elisa suggested maybe all of us wear those. We'll get a picture of all of us wearing our solar glasses here. We'll put it on Facebook so you can watch that. If you don't have a chance to get some of those, maybe we can figure out a way to get you a few, but you should be able to still find a few out there. And please, please don't look directly at an eclipse. Make sure that you have these. These are the ones that are actually specified by NASA. They have the ISO rating on them, which is really important for you to know. And then, again, you can use these not only to look at the solar eclipse, but also use those to photograph those, although to really get a good picture, you need a single lens reflex or a digital camera that has maybe a 100 or 200 millimeter lens on it. But before I talk about the probability that all of this happened by chance, you've got to recognize how much solar eclipses have influenced our history. I'll just use one since we don't have a lot of time here. How a total solar eclipse created France, Italy, and Germany. You might go, what? Well, it turns out there was a solar eclipse back on May 5th, 1840. Now, that solar eclipse passed over Europe. Now, back then, science wasn't very advanced. People had no idea what was happening. And in particular, the Emperor of Bavaria, Emperor Louis, was so terrified of what he witnessed, he died shortly thereafter. Because of that terror, then as a result, there was a need to begin to pass this on to his three sons. And so as a result, this led to what today is called the Treaty of Verdun. And so one son actually took over what today was called Italy. The other was able to oversee what today is called Germany. And the third was to actually lead what today we call France. So you can actually make a very good case that it was a solar eclipse back there in 1840 that led to the creation of France, Italy, and Germany. Just one of those fun facts that I thought we would throw out there to show the relationship between science and history. You know, before I take a phone call, and again, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. I might mention we've got Judge Roy Moore in the second hour, but we'll still take some phone calls when we're not talking with Judge Roy Moore in case you want to join us a little bit later. But when you look at all of these different parameters, all of them which are what? Just right. There have been various calculations. Let me just use Hugh Ross. He's been on the program with us before, and he's come up with 322 different parameters that have to be in existence for life to exist on Earth, for complex life to exist on Earth. Figured that the probability was 1 chance in 10 to the 304th power. That would be 1 with a 0, 304 zeros. Now, how do people that are evolutionists respond to that? Well, they say, so the universe is huge. I mean, we've got so many universes. So we certainly have one universe. We might even have multiverses. So, you know, given enough space, given enough time, somebody's going to hit the cosmic lottery. Well, that's when he started going back and saying, okay, well, let's figure out how many stars in the universe. 10 to the 22nd, probably the right order of magnitude. Let's assume that those have stars. We know that occasionally stars have planets. Most planets are not found around stars. We have, of course, a number of planets around our star, the sun. So even when you run those numbers, it's 1 chance in 282. Again, that would be 282 zeros, or 1 chance in 1 million trillion 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 trillion. I always like to say to my evolutionary friends and my atheist friends, you're betting your eternal destiny on that number. If you want to believe this is all by coincidence, knock yourself out. I think it takes a whole lot less faith to believe that this design implies a designer, and we read about that in Genesis 1. Well, let's, if we can, go to some phone calls here, and if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. In Kentucky, WYGE. Edward, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank you guys and thank God of the work that you guys is doing for him and through him. But my first statement would be on the solar eclipse. I do believe it is an act of God by a design. I believe it was foretold that these things would happen. And in particular, a point you might want to bring up for discussion is what about the sign of Jonah? And I think that would be a pretty relevant point to bring up. Second of all, to some comments that was made on the earlier part of the program about the eradication of evil. The two parts of that, first part, the eradication, I believe that the defiance of God, the punishment is eternal, which would be above the stopping point of eradication, and that would be to Satan and all of his children. And the second part of that, I do believe that God would want somebody who would want to love him and want to serve him and want to be his child by a choice, not by a puppet that don't have a choice in the matter, but somebody who would want to be that, to want to love God. And I'll let you go so you can get back to this program, and I'll tune in.
Sure. You know, one of the things I thought we might point out, and maybe we'll have some time after we talk with Judge Roy Moore in the second hour, is we've had the number of blood moons. You've heard us talk about that before. There were 4 blood moons all at the time when there were the Israel feasts. Some people wondered how that relates to some of the things that are in the Old Testament. Of course, you have this as well. Of course, Anne Graham Lotz has even said that she thinks this might be some evidence of judgment. I'm not so sure about that, but again, I want to provide opportunities to have an open discussion about whether or not some of these signs in the skies have some kind of significance. If they are a sign of judgment, the only question I've got is usually those signs of judgments are pretty specific, and this one is pretty general. Of course, we will see it in the United States, but people around the world will only see it if they tune into a program. But let's take at least another phone call or two, and if we don't get to all these calls after we have our conversation with Judge Roy Moore, we'll certainly take those calls and continue that discussion. But Ken, in North Carolina, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Hi, Kirby. This has to do with the solar eclipse, and I'm curious if scientists have the ability to go back in time and what bibliologists would say about this, that when Jesus was crucified in Jerusalem way back when, and the sky went dark, day became night, would there have been a possibility of a solar eclipse at that moment?
And again, we have been able to run the clock back and find out that there probably was a lunar eclipse wherein you have this blood red moon that Peter talks about at Pentecost, but that was later. As far as we can tell, there was not a solar eclipse. The darkening of the sky, I think, was supernatural by God, but the existence of that blood moon and something that has been documented, interesting enough, even in some science journals, is kind of intriguing about that as well. So you do bring up a good point. No solar eclipse, maybe a lunar eclipse, and that's where the actual moon is behind the Earth. And because the atmosphere actually pushes off, if you will, the shorter wavelengths, the blue, the moon tends to look red. That's why we call it a blood moon. So you're on track in terms of the impact that it shows up in terms of what Peter speaks to. Of course, he's quoting from Joel, and he's also talking about the moon turning blood red. But I think we don't have any evidence of there being a solar eclipse. And I don't think so, because this was, I think, a supernatural act of God at the time. But let's take a break. We have scheduled, assuming he can join us, Judge Roy Moore. As soon as we let him go, I wanted to come back to this because I think some others have questions about astronomy. You have questions about God's judgment. You have questions about the solar eclipse, a lunar eclipse. It's all fair game today. But I did want to give you a chance to hear from Judge Roy Moore. He will be with us, and we'll talk with him briefly before he gets back out on the campaign trail. Thought you'd like to hear from him as well. And so let's take a break. All sorts of great information today on our website, pointofview.net. Go get it and use it before the solar eclipse on Monday. We'll be right back.
There are those who listen to Point of View while they're driving, and some can listen at home or at work. But here's the question: where do you go where you cannot listen to Point of View? Well, if you have the app, the free Point of View radio app, the answer is just about nowhere. This is an on-the-go world, and now wherever you go, Point of View goes with you. Visit the Apple or Google Play Store and download the free Point of View app. You can listen and watch the program live or play it again later. Get Kirby's Viewpoints commentary. Click the Take Action link, learn about important issues, and make a difference in this world. You can also read articles, find a local radio station, easily contact us with your comments or questions. Don't leave home or the office or anywhere else without Point of View. Again, visit the Apple or Google Play Store today and get the app, the free Point of View radio app. Oh, and one more thing, if you like it, click that little button that says Donate Now and join the team. Point of View and the Point of View app, with you on the go. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Second hour today, as I mentioned in the first hour, we're privileged to have with us now Judge Roy Moore. We'll get back to some of the conversation we had in the first hour about the solar eclipse that will be taking place on Monday. And, of course, we'll get into Charlottesville and some of the controversy there and the Confederate monuments. All those issues are certainly fair game, but I did want to have you have a chance to hear from an individual that's been on this program with us many times before. Judge Roy Moore graduated from West Point and has a law degree from the University of Alabama, has served in the 16th Judicial Circuit in Alabama, which is where I think a lot of us got attention and knew more about him. Also, of course, has been the Chief Justice of the Alabama Supreme Court and served for many years as the president of the Foundation for Moral Law there in Montgomery, Alabama, of course, running for the U.S. Senate seat. And Judge Moore, welcome back to Point of View.
Well, it's nice to be back. Thank you.
I know we want to talk about some of the other issues, but since we are going to be talking about Charlottesville, I suspect out on the campaign, some people have been asking you questions about how do we respond to what took place this last weekend and the tearing down of Confederate monuments, and how those in office, including if you become a U.S. Senator, how you would respond to some of the things taking place.
Well, it's unfortunate that someone had to die in this incident. I mean, this is it's just something that shouldn't be occurring. We're having protests and demonstrations and marches and everything else in the world that diverts us from the attention we need to get back to concerning our country. But one of those issues, quite frankly, is our morality and our ability to rid ourselves of this division that's between us and stop hating each other and the prejudice and the bigotry and all this stuff, which has been going on. You know, it's really fueled by a political atmosphere that's divided itself. Nothing's more divided than the Democrat and Republican groups in Washington, D.C. But as far as monuments go, monuments are simply a representation of our past, the good and the bad. It's something that we've overcome, you know, the problems that we had in our country and the division between the states in the 1860s is part of that. We can't erase our past by tearing them down. In fact, that's what communist countries do. They tear the past down from people so they forget who they are. Woodrow Wilson said in 1911, 2 years before he became the 28th president, I think it was, he said, a nation which does not know what it was yesterday does not know what it is today, nor what it is trying to do. We are trying to do a futile thing if we do not know where we came from or what we've been about. And I think that's the point about monuments. If we don't remember our past, we're bound to repeat them in the future. We have overcome serious problems. We have overcome slavery. We've overcome things that have divided us. But we've done so because of our Constitution, because of the acknowledgement of God. And if we forget the acknowledgement of God, we're going to suffer these hatreds among people. It's only by going back to a moral and virtuous standard can we recover and become one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That can only be done, and we can never be great unless we're good.
Well, again, one of the things that people wanted you to take down years ago, and that's, I think, the first time we ever did an interview with you, was the Ten Commandments. And it seems to me that that's something I'd like to keep up if we want to return back to some kind of moral standard, don't you think?
Well, I mean, there's nothing prohibitive about it in the Constitution. That's the point. They said, well, it's religious. It's religious, but it is only a recognition that God upon which the nation was founded. It doesn't command anybody to do anything. It doesn't dictate anybody's belief. It's merely a representation of the laws of God upon which this nation was based. And I can prove that legally. But it's just, because people were offended that they didn't like the monument and of the Ten Commandments, and therefore they wanted it taken down, and the federal court assisted. But it was wrong, and it's wrong to take down monuments of the past.
One of the things that we've posted here is a piece by Jerry Newcomb, which he referred to as the shameful suspension of Judge Roy Moore. And that gets back to one of the other moral issues that I'm sure people are wondering about, and that is whether it's the Ten Commandments or, in this case, the ruling that comes down on the issue of same-sex marriage, and then the actions that you had in an effort to say that you are not bound by something that was rendered by the Supreme Court. Can you explain that? Because that's certainly been an issue that people have been asking about even in your campaign.
The federal district judge that issued that order had a depiction of Themis, the Greek goddess, outside of the courthouse in the monument, the face of Themis. I mean, we're talking about pure hypocrisy going on in our government. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, being the first part of the First Amendment. And that doesn't forbid the recognition of God. If you go back to the definition of religion in the founding era, recognized both by Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Joseph Story, the United States Supreme Court itself, it was the duties we owe to the Creator and the manner of discharging those duties. If you put that definition in the First Amendment, you see it's totally about Congress not making any laws respecting an establishment of the duties you owe to God and the manner of discharging those duties. But it recognizes God. Without God, there would be no First Amendment religion clauses. And we need to go back to an understanding of what the Constitution is about, not what we think it is about.
Well, again, that's one of the themes that runs through that. I know when you actually had this come down, you said it was politically motivated and brought about by the Southern Poverty Law Center and the Judicial Inquiry Commission. But in some respects, that's kind of the theme of your campaign, is it not? It's been the theme, really, of your service in office, and that is the need for us to come back to the Constitution. Whether we believe it or not, that is the ruling document, and we seem to have strayed quite far from it, haven't we?
We've gone very far from it, and we don't understand it. And it is at the basis of what I believe, because that's the supreme law of the land. It's not what judges say it is when they put themselves above the Constitution and rule accordingly. They're sworn, as well as every other judge is sworn, to the United States Constitution. And when they put themselves above it, they become judicial supremacists and then violate their own oath.
We are talking Judge Roy Moore. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, let me give some of you a chance to join the conversation. We'll regain and revisit the conversation we've had before, but if you would like to ask a question of Judge Roy Moore, we open up the phones, 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to know a little bit more about him, we have a link to the website, which is available at our website, pointofview.net, and as you go there, it will link you directly to roymore.org, and you can find out more about the campaign, for more about some of the positions he's held. And of course, we posted that one article that might help you understand some of the questions that surfaced about his suspension and why he stands on the Constitution and has rejected some of the other actions taken against him. So if you'd like to join the conversation or like to ask a question with Judge Roy Moore on the line, we'll keep him here for a little bit longer. That number is 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take your calls and continue our conversation with him and you right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Dinesh D'Souza is ready to debunk what he calls the big lie in his book by the same title. The left has been saying that the president is a fascist and the Republican Party is akin to the Nazi Party. Street thugs and pundits throw around the Nazi card and fascism card with abandon. He believes it is time to turn the tables and explain who the real fascists are. If you want to see a true fascist, you need to look at Benito Mussolini. His favorite phrase was, everything in the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state. He was a statist who wanted every aspect of society under the control of the government. He even considered the word totalitarian a positive term. Adolf Hitler also believed in state control, but in a different way. When he assumed leadership of the German Workers' Party, he changed the name to the National Socialist German Workers' Party. He explained, we are socialist. We are the enemies of today's capitalist system of exploitation, and we are determined to destroy this system under all conditions. None of this sounds like the Republican Party. It has usually been the party of small government, political liberty, and economic freedom. If anything, fascism and socialism are more accurate descriptions of the American left. When he was on my radio program, Dinesh D'Souza also talked about the interesting parallels he saw between Nazi Germany and 20th century America. Until he did his research, he thought these correlations were interesting but not connected. It turns out that the motivations behind Hitler's brown shirts and the Ku Klux Klan are more interconnected than he expected. The modern eugenics movement in America, espoused by people like Margaret Sanger, also found a place in the policies in Nazi Germany. The Big Lie may be his most controversial book because he makes connections like this that few others have ever seen. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Sony Pictures, All Saints, the inspiring story of Pastor Michael Spurlock with John Corbett. In theaters August 25th, rated PG, allsaintsmovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Judge Roy Moore with us today. If you'd like to join our conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Just before we take some phone calls, Judge Moore, another issue that I know you've addressed, and it's certainly something we talk about here, not only moving away from the Constitution, but even the possibility of using Sharia law as an interpretation. We've had individuals here that actually want to maybe even implement those ideas in various courts. We've talked with those of what has happened maybe over there in the UK. So, again, the question I have is this something that you've been paying attention to and see this as some kind of concern?
Well, I think Sharia law does contradict the Constitution very clear. And I think that our Constitution is the laws by which we are governed, not Sharia law. Sharia law, for example, says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or approving the free exercise thereof. Those were the duties you owe to the Creator. When Sharia law comes in, you see what happens in Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Sudan, Afghanistan, places where there is Sharia law, then it starts taking over, and Sharia law becomes the law under which you're governed.
So again, some of the very important issues that need to be addressed as those that are going to be looking at the future of America. Let's take some phone calls. We'll go to Dublin, Georgia. Greg, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. You're on with Judge Roy Moore.
Hey, how you doing, Judge? I just had a question. I'm from Savannah, Georgia, really. Okay. And I keep hearing that the question is that we want to go back to the good old days, and I'm kind of lost because those were the days when everything was a disarray, which causes us to be where we're at now. You know, we wouldn't be talking about statues or none of those things if we didn't go through all that. And we're quoting our historians as being these great guys, but most of them were slave owners. I think everybody was just confused back then, and I think to start a new day, we need to erase those things. He was saying that we don't need to know. We need to know where we come from. That's true, but we also need to know that that wasn't right where we came from.
Okay, good question. Any comments, Judge Moore?
Well, again, I say you don't erase your history. If you go back in history, you'll find black people had slaves in New Orleans. You'll find things that you didn't think you know. But I'm not for slavery. I don't know many people around me that are for slavery. I'm not for prejudice. And I know we had prejudice back then. We've got prejudice today. But I'll tell you what we did have back then that we need to go to. We need to go back to the time where black people and white people had stronger families that they supported in love. Our families are divided. Children are adverse to their parents. Parents are adverse to their children. We've got some children don't even know who their parents are. Those were better days. I'm not saying go back in time. I'm not go back to bad things, but you've got to know where we've come from. There at one time, black families were the strongest families in America. They cared for their elderly. They cared for their children. And they cared for each other. We're seeing that not happen in today's society. We're seeing it not happen not only in black families, but white families. We have gone to where we're not a unified society where we love each other. And I think we need to go back to the foundations which were Christian in our country. And yeah, that's all I'm saying. I'm not for going back to slavery. Indeed, if we forget our history, we're bound to repeat it.
Let's take another phone call. We'll go to South Carolina. Eric, you're on with Judge Roy Moore. Eric, are you there? Well, we'll put Eric on hold here and get to that. One of the other questions I wanted to put on the table was just what kind of policies you think we could move through the United States Senate, because it seems to me right now, Judge Moore, that the Senate is the place where good bills go to die. I can see all sorts of bills that have passed the House that never make it through the United States Senate. Are there some things we can do to change that?
Well, there are. You can remove the filibuster rule. That doesn't mean you stop filibuster. That means you stop a rule that was put there to stop filibuster and to do it a different way, if you will, and require 60 votes. But that in itself is a supermajority not specified in the Constitution. You don't pass bills by supermajority, and therefore a supermajority requirement that's what has to happen before they get to the floor violates the Constitution. And we need to remove that, and then we'd start seeing more senators, instead of hiding from legislation, passing it.
Let's go back to the phones. We'll go to Norcross, Georgia. Priscilla, thank you for joining us today. You're on with Judge Roy Moore.
Oh, hello, Judge Roy Moore. I just want to thank you for, I really didn't know how to put the issue about the statues, the history, the historical monuments being torn down, but I knew it was absolutely wrong. And I grew up in Jim Crow, so I really know, I know the experience of it. But I still knew it was wrong. And but you put it in a great way. That is history. And America has done so much to right the wrong there. And I thank God for this great nation, because truly it is a great nation. And I thank the Lord for you, Judge Roy Moore. You're really a blessing to hear.
Thank you.
Let's see if we can maybe pick up one or two more phone calls in just a minute. But again, Judge Moore, if people want to know a little bit more about you, or to get information or know about your campaign, we do have a link to the website there, which again is one that's easy to find. It's roymore.org. And so again, you've got an election coming up in September, don't you?
Yes, we do. And we're looking forward to it. And quite frankly, it's an election that's been having people in Washington, the establishment in Washington, the Washington crowd, whatever you want to call them, control what the people do in Alabama. And that's going to be happening in other states soon, because they've got a large funds, I should say, to retain incumbents. You know, most people want to have term limits. They don't want large funds in the Congress to retain the people there. They're doing exactly opposite of what the people want.
So again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212, and we'll take some more phone calls in just a minute, and we have information for you about Judge Roy Moore. And as I mentioned, we will get back into some of the other issues that we've been discussing right now on Point of View. So if you'd like to call in now, we'll pick up those calls after Judge Moore goes. But any other comments that you might have for us about the campaign, or what are some of the key issues you think are going to be surfacing over the next couple of weeks?
Well, I think the key issues that we need to address, of course, are Medicare, or not Medicare, the health care situation in our country. We need to open up state lines to free enterprise system and get back the right to choose our health care, just like Congress can. And we need to get on to this illegal alien problem we've had for a long time, and it can be solved. It can be solved, in my opinion, very quickly if you use the United States military. Some people jump up in the air and say, oh, that's a violation of the Posse Comitatus Act. Well, it isn't. And it has been, the U.S. military has been used in support of the Border Patrol, many different administrations. And it can be. And if the United States military can't stop people coming across our borders, a wall certainly won't do it. But if it takes a wall, and the military will do everything we need to do to stop illegal aliens crossing our border, and that's just securing us for our it's security reasons.
Good. Judge Roy Moore has been with us. And again, Judge, thank you so very much for joining us. I know we have a full bank of phone calls, so we'll take those calls in the last half hour. But thank you for giving us some time today in the midst of a busy campaign. We look forward to the next opportunity.
Well, thank you very much, sir, for having me.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we have a full bank of phone calls. So, again, all sorts of things are on the table here. We've talked a little bit about this solar eclipse. Some of you have some questions about that. Let me just clarify that even though I have a few of these solar glasses, I'm not giving them out because we're going to be using those. So, again, if you misunderstood that, you can, in many cases, find them in your local library or schools or other places. But I do want to get into a little bit more about the solar eclipse and the blood moons issue, because that's something that was raised in that first hour. Some of you want to talk about what's been happening in Charlottesville. That's fair game as well. We've posted a couple of articles today, Angry White Males, as well as the group that was ignored. And so those are articles on the website, in addition to the one that I mentioned in the first hour, Solar Eclipses Design or Coincidence. I think this is a great opportunity, whether it's been the lunar eclipses we had, the 4 different blood moons that happened during Passover and Tabernacles on 2 different occasions, or the solar eclipse, to begin even using that as an evangelistic conversation. So we'll talk about that as well. Talk a little bit more about how the solar eclipse should be viewed so that you don't hurt your eyes. And, of course, we'll also take the calls and comments about what has been taking place right there in Charlottesville, Virginia, as well as Durham, North Carolina, and other places. So we'll take a break. If you'd like to join us, I think I know a line opened up, 1-800-351-1212.
Would you like to be above average or exceptional? I'll explain how you can be in a moment. What do you think about change? Some people love it, others not so much. I'm guessing you agree our culture needs change, but how will that happen? Change happens with you and your influence. If each of us does our part, God can change the culture through us. That's a goal at Point of View, to help you change things around you. We never charge for the information we deliver each day, but that information is not free. There is a significant cost in getting it to you. You know who helps us do that? About 1 out of every 800 listeners to Point of View. So you can be above average. You can be exceptional by visiting pointofview.net and clicking the banner Change Happens with You, or by calling 1-800-347-5151. Thank you for being exceptional by supporting Point of View. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Looks like most of you would like to talk about what has been happening in Charlottesville, but the broader issue of whether or not we should be tearing down statues and monuments. Of course, you had a chance to hear from Judge Roy Moore and his perspective on that. We certainly welcome your phone calls to get some perspective as well. We've posted a couple of articles. This one by Kevin Williamson, Angry White Boys. Thought that was very helpful. Also one by Ben Shapiro, the group that got ignored in Charlottesville. The one that we talked about last week with Dinesh D'Souza. As a matter of fact, my commentary today is about Dinesh D'Souza and the interview we did last week, because, of course, there has been a lot of attention on the alt-right, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, almost no attention on Antifa, the anti-fascist, and a group that has really been involved in that. And so the Ben Shapiro article would be a good one. Also one by Jarrett Stepman, Mob Rule Prevails in Toppling the Confederate Statue. He's talking about what happened there in the Durham County Courthouse in North Carolina. So if you have some comments or questions about these issues, that is fair game. 1-800-351-1212. First hour, we did talk about the solar eclipse. Also, we could mention the lunar eclipse, blood moons, and the rest. So that is still a topic that we can get into today, or if not, we'll certainly cover it maybe briefly tomorrow, certainly more extensively on Monday when it is actually taking place. A very significant event, and wanted to give you a little bit of facts and figures there as well. Let's go back to the phones, though, and give you a chance to express your opinion. In California, KYCC, and Joyce, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. Do we have Joyce? Lynn, excuse me. Lynn, excuse me. I was looking at something else. There's a computer sometimes is hard for me to see. Lynn in California, go for it. Go for it.
Thank you. Thank you, Kirby. I consider this my school time, so my 2 hours of school each day. So thank you very much. I don't know what I'm missing, but like 2 days ago, our headlines of our newspaper was 2 days, Trump condemns the hate group. But I printed out his original comments, and he definitely condemned hate groups, bigotry, violence, and he's done it other times, in the past.
Sure is. So, that was part of the campaign. So this is not the first time he's been asked that. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So what I'm thinking is this just another attack on him, or attack on the presidency, or on the conservative Christian Republicans part of the party, just to paint everyone as evil. And when I listened to Maxine Waters when she said the white supremacist house, it just made me cringe. It's just very hate filled and meant to destroy. So, I don't know why there's all this anger directed towards him, because I think he has denounced, what happened and the evil intent of these groups, both groups, And then the other part would be like the Facebook targeting. Just, to me, is very scary. To me, it's the cyberbullying. I don't agree with what these people, or do, say, or what they, their ideology. But I think when you do the targeting and they actually, misidentified people, I think it's so dangerous. And then I was trying to think, what has happened to our society and why? And so I was trying to think back, was it the 2008 or the 2012 Democratic Convention when they threw God out of the party platform? And so to me, it's like without the moral truth, then it's just whatever's right in whoever eye, or society's eye, whoever's telling you. And then you can, disagree, attack anyone. Like we've had, bakers and florists and the Family Research Council, have all been, under attack. And I think that also goes back to our monuments. And even in the Bible, God didn't throw out the bad stuff. It's all there. We need to remember and hopefully learn from our past. And I had the opportunity to go to Israel. We went to the Holocaust Museum, and the one dedicated to the million of children, that were also murdered. And it's overwhelming. But my son had the opportunity when he was in Germany to go to Auschwitz, and we went to visit him, and he said he could not go back there. I think that's the museums are good, but to go someplace and to see things and to be reminded, just becomes overwhelming too.
Yes, it is. I've been to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. I've been to the Holocaust Museum in Israel. Of course, they even have a Holocaust Museum here in Dallas. I've been to all of those, and every one of them is so sobering. But back to your bigger point, why are people reacting to Donald Trump? Well, they don't like him. They was started with the meme that he's the illegitimate president. They can't believe that this individual is in office. Now, to be fair, he gives them a lot of ammunition to come against him. But even if he was as gracious as his vice president, Mike Pence, who I think very highly of, they'd still come after him because the issue is political correctness and the fact that up until now, the left has had the levers of power in one place or another. They've had it either in the Senate or in the House or in the presidency, sometimes in all three. They, of course, always can depend on the media. They can always depend on the judiciary, but not as much now because of some of these judges that are being appointed. And so this is the reaction that we are losing control, so we are going to, because we don't have any limits, justify any kind of action. We can lie about individuals. We can attack individuals. We can turn a blind eye to what, say, the Antifa, the anti-fascist, have been doing, or Occupy Wall Street, or various groups and things of that nature. And so what you're seeing is playing out, and I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. And whether it's collusion with Russia, or now the latest meme that we've got, and that is that Donald Trump never specifically condemned the alt-right. Well, yes, he did. And then when he did, that wasn't enough. And then even when members of Congress did, I can show you articles where they said, well, I'm glad that Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio condemned these groups, but I don't believe them anyway. So, you just can't win in the current set of circumstances. That's just the way the game is played. We can sit here and lament this, but this is the reality that we have right now, and that's why we need to stand up, but also be gracious and practice civility, even when the other side doesn't practice civility. And when you've lost God as your center and you no longer believe in the golden rule that I want to treat other people as I'd like to be treated, but instead it becomes the law of the jungle, that's kind of the war that we are finding ourselves in right now, the culture war that we find ourselves in, and it's just going to get more and more angry, I suspect, before it gets better.
It's the golden rule. Yes, very important.
Well, Lynn, I appreciate your call. Let me give a few more of you a chance to join the conversation here today. We'll head to South Carolina this time. Patricia, what would you like to add to our conversation?
Yes, good afternoon, Kirby. I would just like to add, as it relates to the Civil War statues, I believe that, yes, we should keep them up because we do not want to forget our past. But having said that, I also believe we should have an appropriate size placard denouncing what those so-called heroes stood for and the ravages that resulted as a result of slavery. I think we should have an appropriate size placard right next to each of the Civil War statues. And that's my comment.
Well, I think it's a good comment. My sad reality is that would not placate those that want to bring it down. Of course, you heard the other day, if you were listening, we had E.W. Jackson, and he said maybe the best thing to do is to put some of the statues in museums, and certainly that is the case. But I don't know. I mean, that seems like a very good common sense way to address that issue, but I don't think that is going to appease or mollify those who want to tear down every one of these statues. But Patricia, I think it's a good idea, and appreciate you sharing it with us today here on Point of View.
Thank you.
Let's see if we can give a few more of you a chance to join the conversation. Well, let me just take a break here, and we'll come back and take a couple more phone calls. Some of you would like to address this issue, and that's certainly fair game. If you don't have a chance to get through, do have a rather busy set of phone calls today, and we'll try to get in as many as we can before the end of the program. Tomorrow is our weekend edition. Penn and Dexter with us as we will have our roundtable discussion. Let me just mention on Monday, I'm going to have Jerry Newcomb with us. He is the one that wrote the shameful suspension of Judge Roy Moore. We're going to be talking about this as well as a variety of other issues. And I'll see what I can do also to talk about the solar eclipse tomorrow, but also on Monday, because I just wanted to give you a couple of other facts and figures about that as well. My real concern is if people don't have these special glasses and they look at the eclipse, we may have reports of people that have burning out their eyes. So I hope that you will be very careful on Monday. We'll talk more about that right after these important messages.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The topic of immunizations can be controversial to many. Some even have a religious objection to having their children immunized as a requirement to attend public schools. Those objections often fall on deaf ears, but some states have provided for a religious exemption for parents who, for religious reasons, object to their children receiving the needle. Florida falls into that category. So naturally, when Patrick Flynn informed his Florida school that he was invoking that exemption, he was surprised to hear the school refused to follow the law. So he filed a lawsuit. Now, there's an important fact that I haven't told you yet. The school is a private Catholic school. It's not a public school. As such, it is itself protected by the First Amendment to make its own policies in keeping with their faith. A unanimous state appellate court sided with the Catholic diocese, citing the doctrine of church autonomy. Siding with Flynn would, quote, further his own religious views at the expense of the diocese on the topic of immunizations, wrote the court. Quote, we are convinced that a secular court should not be making the judgment as to which side's religious view of immunization is to be respected, unquote. In other words, while Flynn has a right to the protection of his religious beliefs, he may not use the state's judicial arm to compel a private religious institution to depart from its religious beliefs. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Guide at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
For a few more minutes, and if you don't have a chance to get through, we will certainly give you that opportunity tomorrow on our weekend edition. Let's go back to the phones in South Carolina, WLPE. Eric, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, you're welcome. I was glad to hear what Judge Moore had to say about tearing things down and forgetting the past. And they had a black gentleman, he's a priest, I guess, was on Tucker Carlson last night. Talks about when he sees the Robert E. Lee statue and the rebel flag, he gets offended. Well, you know, when God brought the Israelites out of their bondage for 400 years, and he told Moses, I ain't going to close back the sea yet. You go in and get a bunch of stones, we're going to stack them up, and you go remind everybody from here on out that God delivered you from the slavery every time you see it. And that's what they should see when they see the flag and Robert E. Lee, to remember where they came from and what God delivered them from, instead of being so angry.
You know, the word that runs through the Old Testament constantly is remember. And of course, you can go to Joshua putting up the stones, and there are lots of monuments, and you can think of Jacob. I mean, you just really go through the Old Testament, and there is just constant emphasis on remember. And sometimes it's to remember evil things, interestingly enough. And if you think about it, the Holocaust, we have Holocaust museums. That's to remember an evil thing. Nobody thinks that when I go to the Holocaust Museum that the pictures that we have of Adolf Hitler and Goebbels and Eichmann and all of that are celebrating them, just the opposite. So one of the suggestions that Patricia had just a minute ago is leave the statues up and explain how we perceive what happened after the fact. But I just don't think that's going to placate or mollify any of those individuals that want to tear down every statue when they're talking about taking off the faces of Stone Mountain. And when Al Sharpton the other day says he wants to get rid of the Thomas Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C., that shows you how far some individuals want to go on this issue. But you know what? Let's give a few more of you a chance to join our conversation today. We'll head to Charleston and talk to Rosa. What would you like to add to our conversation today?
Good evening, Mr. Kirby. My name is Rosalie Kula-Sauls. I am 81 years old. I think that memories are precious. My husband, when God called my husband, we had been married 62 years, and I was born and raised in Hardyville, South Carolina, what was considered the other side of the tracks. It was at a time in 36, well, when I was 10 years old, we were poor and didn't know it because in 1946, my daddy volunteered to go into the Army. He said, my brother's in it, I love my country, I came to volunteer. And they said, you will never be drafted, you have 3 children. He said, I came to volunteer. But going back to the other side of the tracks, just within 200 yards of us was a lovely black family. We were poor and didn't know it, but it was not until what we were, in all due respect, called Aunt Hattie and Uncle Ned Austin, and their son Esau, which caught the one and only little mail bag and took it across to the post office, the little post office back then. That when his parents passed, he was selling the things in the house. And, oh, my goodness, they had to move from the north because I still had the picture with the picture and the frame with his father in it. He came, and when we would kill the one and only hog, we would share the shortening with them, and there were no electricity, no freezers. When my father was to
so you were just kind of sharing with everybody there in the community. And again, we don't exactly live in that world anymore where we share with our neighbors and we reach out to people that are downtrodden. And I appreciate that, but I want to give a few more a chance to join the conversation here before we run out of time. So let's go to Texas, KBJS. And Joyce, thank you for sharing with us today. What would you like to add?
First off, I think Trump was very right when he said he wanted to find out more information before he went on with his statements, which is what he should have done in the first place. But that's like the first rule of journalism. Get all your sources together, make a decision. Otherwise, it's editorializing.
Sure. Well, again, remember Barack Obama when he made that comment about the Cambridge police and he didn't have all the facts and later on kind of had to change that? There's some value there. And by the way, I might just point out, I did not know this until yesterday. Somebody looked it up. This is the first time that we've demanded that a president address one of these issues involving the alt-right or neo-Nazis or whatever. Most of the time it just happens and it's just simply ignored. But, of course, they didn't want to miss an opportunity to put the president on notice to make some kind of statement, and then when he made the statement, it wasn't sufficient enough, they said. So go ahead.
As long as his statement agrees with what they want to say, the current truth is what they want. Pulling down the statues is absolutely stupid. black people, Asians, anybody can look at those statues and say, lift a fist and say, right on, because we are free because of this man. Robert E. Lee, why don't we pull down Grant statues? I mean, why don't we go up north and pull down their statues?
I'm afraid they're going to be pulling down a lot more. Some people have jokingly said, and only half joking, maybe we need to take off 2 of the faces out of Mount Rushmore. I mean, this is getting out of hand really quick. But let me take one more phone call real quick. In Texas, KBGS, and Tamara, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Kirby. Well, all I have to say is this is the face of anarchy. And if the police don't stop standing down, if the mayors don't start enforcing the law, when these people destroy public property and they are violent, it's not going to abate. And if we don't take local responsibility, you're going to force ordinary law-abiding citizens to take the law in their own hands. And
that's my concern.
They're anarchists.
Yeah, you're going to get counter protest all the time. You're going to get vigilantes. We've said before that even though this is a national program, you really have to pay attention to the local elections, because look at what we've said about mayors that wanted to change their view about bathrooms or about homosexuality or whatever it might be. If you have a mayor right now or a police chief that just isn't going to enforce the law, you need to know about that, and you need to make sure that the next time there's an election, you give them a pink slip and send them packing, because this is going to be one of those issues where we're going to see who really has the moral courage to stand up and protect the property and the people. And when you have groups like Antifa, the anti-fascists that are willing to beat people, they're willing to break windows, they're willing to prevent people like Milo Yiannopoulos or Ann Coulter from speaking at the University of California at Berkeley, or they're going to come after anybody that they think might be a fascist using their bizarre definition of it, you better have the mayor and the police chief and those in law enforcement being willing to protect you, or we will have anarchy. And once you have anarchy, you know what will happen next. You'll have vigilantes, because there's a lot of individuals that have access to weapons right now. And if indeed they don't believe that the law enforcement officials will protect them, they'll start protecting themselves. And that is not a very good scenario either. So those are some really important points that you've made today. We have a lot more to talk about on Friday. It is our weekend edition. I'd like to know a little bit more about this solar eclipse, and especially this piece on design or coincidence. We've posted that. We, of course, have information about Judge Roy Moore. We have information about some of the conversation that we've had today about these statutes, the angry white males, the group that got ignored in Charlottesville. It's all available at the website, pointofview.net. So please take the time to get that information, pass it on to others, and I hope you'll join us tomorrow on our Friday Weekend Edition. We'll see you then.
From Affirm Films and Provident Films, who brought you War Room, comes All Saints. New pastor Michael Spurlock, his struggling congregation, and a group of refugees come together, trusting God as they plant seeds for a future that might just save them all.
Start a farm, you work together, and save the church.
All Saints, starring John Corbett. In theaters August 25th. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. More information is available at allsaintsmovie.com.
Point of View Radio wants to fuel change in our culture, but we need your help to do it. And I use the word need very intentionally. I worked with a well-known radio ministry for 29 years, a program that helped a lot of people. They got saved, they got elected to Congress. It produced a lot of good. But people started thinking that someone else would give, and that program isn't here anymore. Your gift today can make sure that doesn't happen to Point of View. Visit pointofview.net and click the banner Change Happens With You, or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net at 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank